everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Welcome to a special edition of Red and Blue, the State of Our Union. The killing of George Floyd was the convergence of seismic events in American society, the devastating and disproportionate health and economic gut punch of the COVID-19 pandemic on Black and brown communities, meeting the death of yet another African American captured on video at the hands of a police officer. President John F. Kennedy famously said, "A rising tide lifts all boats," but that has not become a reality for the Black community in the United States. Black Americans consistently trail in household income, home ownership, and employment. The spread of coronavirus has only made matters worse. While May's job numbers showed unemployment among white workers at 12.4%, that number for Blacks rose to nearly 17%, the worst in decades. George Floyd's death brought back to the surface the issue of policing and how officers engage with communities of color. The names of those who have died at the hands of police are too many to list. Many of them are chanted in countless protests across the nation. American police officers kill civilians at a rate far higher than any other wealthy democracy. The presence of military vehicles and weapons at protests is not uncommon. While cell phone video and social media have increased the profile of these incidents, America's collective conscience has largely failed to provoke legislative action until now. The repeated pattern has many Black Americans asking the same question as George Floyd's niece at his Tuesday funeral in his hometown of Houston.
Someone said, "Make America great again," but when has America ever been great?
Nikole Killion, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Joel Payne, and Joseph Pinion join me now. Nikole is a CBS News correspondent. Caitlin is our CBSN political reporter. Joel is a CBS News political contributor, Democratic strategist, and host of the Here Comes the Payne podcast. And Joseph is a Republican strategist and founder of Pinion Enterprises. Welcome. Great to see all of you. Nikole, let me start with you. The White House is reportedly working on an executive order focused on police reform. Who is involved and what details do you have?
Well, at this point, the White House really isn't tipping its hand. What we learned from the White House earlier today is that the president has been reviewing a number of proposals, according to Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, that he's been doing this for several days now. But the White House still hasn't offered any specifics as to what ultimately the president may do. We do know that they are finalizing some type of proposal that could be ready in the next several days. But the White House still very mum as to whether or not the president agrees with some of the Democratic proposals that have been put forth. For instance, banning chokeholds. One thing the White House has made clear is that it does not support reduced immunity for officers. That is something that is a non-starter.
Well, Caitlin, in an op-ed published in USA Today, Joe Biden called for rooting out systemic racism. He wrote, quote, "We have to deliver on this moment to achieve fundamental changes that address racial inequalities and white supremacy in our country." What policies is his campaign proposing to achieve this?
Right, all of these issues coming to the forefront of the 2020 presidential campaign. Notably, Joe Biden has resisted calls that we're hearing from protesters to defund the police. He says he does not agree with that sentiment. Instead, he wants to do a few different things. First, he talked today about spending $300 million on community policing. He wants to divert some funds to address mental health and other issues. So defunding the police is not something that he wants to do. Instead, he wants to have more investments in other kinds of programs. But I think what was really important about what he mentioned in that op-ed and what he has been saying on the virtual campaign trail is that this is part of a broader issue here, that this is what some Democrats said kind of early on in the primaries, that you can't just talk about racial injustice in the context of criminal justice reform, that you have to address systemic racism all around. So in that op-ed, Biden also talked about policies to address housing, to address small business and entrepreneurship, to kind of show that, again, again, against the backdrop of a pandemic in which we've seen Black Americans disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus and the economic fallout, that policies have to be kind of well-rounded. So I think that's the message that you're going to see continue from the Biden campaign.
And Joel, in addition to this issue of defunding police departments, Joe Biden is also facing increased pressure to name a Black woman as his running mate. Are Democrats actually satisfied with how Joe Biden is responding so far?
Well, there was a report that some progressive Democrats on Capitol Hill were doing just that and calling for the former vice president to name a Black woman as his vice president. I think Joe Biden could certainly still win the hearts and minds of the Democratic Party if there was not a Black woman who was his running mate. However, I think it would be more difficult. And if you're the Biden campaign, you have to ask yourself, is it worth the effort to explain myself versus doing the thing that you know will bring your coalition together and make so many groups within the establishment of the Democratic Party happy? Not to mention the fact that there are so many strong African-American women that he can pick from, whether it's Val Demings, whether it's Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms of Atlanta, Georgia, whether it's Senator Kamala Harris or even Stacey Abrams. There is a wealth of strong Black women who would all be very palatable to the base of the party. So I think Biden's question is one of convenience at this point. Is it convenient for him to create a question versus just doing the thing that he knows is going to make a lot in the base of his party happy?
Joseph, let me turn to you. According to the Wall Street Journal, the unemployment rate among African Americans reached near record lows in February. It has since tripled. President Trump, of course, has campaigned very hard on a strong economy, which is now taking a significant hit. A slate of recent polls show him trailing Joe Biden nationally and in several key states. How does the president and how do down-ballot Republicans adapt?
Well, look, I mean, here's the reality. I think that, President Trump was prepared, as many of us were prepared to hear about 7 million new jobs being created, about an increase in wages for all Americans. Obviously, now I think the pivot must come to who do you trust to rebuild the American economy? The person who was instrumental in creating those 7 million new jobs, or the person who was the co-pilot for America watching wages be suppressed for African Americans, for women, for young people in one of the slowest recoveries in modern history. So I think that's where the pivot's going to go. I think, again, if President Trump is serious about talking about fiscal opportunities, economic opportunities for Black people, then there has to be recognition of the fact that Black workers are not recovering at the same speed that non-Black workers are recovering, seeing that recovery at. So I think those are the things that are going to be focused on as we look at the economic realities of a world thrust into turmoil by the COVID-19 crisis.
And Nikole, President Trump is traveling to Dallas tomorrow, where he's scheduled to meet with law enforcement and community leaders. What's on the agenda?
Well, he will do just that. He's expected to go to a Dallas church where he will have a roundtable with faith leaders, law enforcement, small business owners. Really, the White House says this will be to discuss solutions to this historic economic situation that we're in, and to also address some of these issues of disparities across, the economy, across the justice system, health, and the like, in light of everything that has happened. Yet still, we know that the president will also be announcing his plans for what the White House is calling holistic revitalization and recovery. Now, I will note that, as far as his appearance Thursday is concerned, there is no mention of race specifically. So as of now, it sounds like this might be a broader themed address, if you will, more focused on the economy, which we know is something that the president cares passionately about, and even today told reporters that, again, he thinks that next year the economy will be the best it's ever been. We also know, though, that while he's in Dallas, the president will be attending his first in-person fundraiser since the COVID pandemic, which is significant because the president has also indicated that he intends to move ahead with campaign rallies in fact, just a short time ago saying that he expects that first one will happen in Oklahoma and that he anticipates traveling to other states. Unclear yet when exactly those will happen, but our reporting has indicated that he is looking to hold these campaign rallies within the coming weeks. So that's what's ahead for the president. He'll also, of course, be spending part of his weekend at his resort in Bedminster, New Jersey. Also will be his first trip there since the pandemic.
Well, Caitlin, in a recent piece for CBSNews.com, you looked at how Black Lives Matter protests are expanding into suburbs and small towns. How might that change the political environment heading into the election?
Well, it's been really striking to see these protests not only happen in big Democratic cities like New York and Los Angeles, but spreading into suburban areas where we saw a big turnover from Republicans to Democrats in the 2018 midterm election, especially among suburban women in particular, and also into small towns and rural areas where we've seen Donald Trump do very well. And what's striking to me and to political strategists and city managers that we spoke to is that it's not just they are looking at kind of the broader coalitions that are turning out to participate in these demonstrations and seeing a lot of white people participate in these demonstrations. So both parties are taking a look at this and trying to figure out what this means for November. And I think it's very interesting to see when you're looking at the policy responses, the legislative responses, that you are seeing Republicans, if not, they are not on board with what Democrats want to do, but they are proposing their own reforms when it comes to the police. So that shows or signals that there could be some movement here as the president tries to campaign on law and order, and you're seeing that even in places where the president did well in past elections, people are organizing and demonstrating. And that is the key, that these demonstrations in these areas where you wouldn't expect demonstrations to happen are coming organically. I've talked to activists who became kind of overnight activists, actually. People who had never participated in protests or demonstrations before are kind of now taking it upon themselves. And people who study this kind of thing say that has the markings of a movement.
Yeah, it would seem to signal a shift that we haven't seen before. In our final minutes here, I do want to ask Joel and Joseph about what we saw took place in Georgia. Georgia is facing a lot of criticism over major issues related to yesterday's primary election. I'm told we have Joseph. Joseph, what do you think these problems tell us about what we might expect come November?
Well, look, I think if you're a person who values, one person, one vote, what we saw yesterday was deeply troubling. I think if we have the hallmark of America being the peaceful transfer of power, being the full faith and credit of the American vote, then certainly we do not want to get to a point where people do not have faith in the fact that the people who wanted to vote were given the opportunity to do so. So when you're looking at drone shots of people, lining city blocks. We have all seen long lines at the polls, but this was really on a level we have never seen before. And so I think it's incumbent of us as a nation to begin now to start thinking about what we can do to make sure that people can get to the polls in a timely manner. Do we need to open up an extended voting period across the nation so that people don't have to vote on one day, but we can have extended early voting opportunities? I think that is something that we need to discuss because, again, if we have this happen in November, state by state, drone shot by drone shot, I think that, again, if you thought we had problems in the Bush hanging Chad election, you haven't seen anything like the fervor we'll see all across America if we have a repeat of this in the 2020 election.
Right, would seem that now is really the time to act. Nikole Killion, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Joel Payne, and Joseph Pinion, thank you all very much. Great to see you.
Thank you.